Hello, what is up, everyone? It is War Crimes Uwu. You may know me from Twitch, you may know me from a few other people's YouTube channels, but I'm striking out on my own, and I wanted to bring you all a sort of pre-release primer for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. This is not a review of the set, it's more how to help you do well in your pre-release and in limited events for this set in general. This is actually going to be my first video for this YouTube channel, but I have some experience with YouTube. So hopefully this will kind of go off, and at least hopefully this will help you with your pre-release, which of course starting tomorrow. We're recording this Thursday night. Hopefully that's when it'll get uploaded. But yeah, we're talking about Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. We are going to go over the new mechanics. We're going to talk briefly on the returning mechanics. We're going to talk about all the different limited archetypes, the commons and uncommons you should be looking out for if you want to play those archetypes, and just generally how the format's going to work so that you can be at the top of your game starting with the pre-release tomorrow. Alright, so we're going to talk about the new mechanics first. Now, this is one of the mechanics that's called reconfigure. So one of the problems that they've come across in design has been equipment's not being good if you don't have any creatures to put them on. You know, go figure. It's the same with auras, although it's a little bit less of a problem because you can kind of pay for them halfway, and then when you have a creature later, you can put them on there. But with reconfigure, they've sort of solved that problem. So if you look at these reconfigure cards, they are equipments that are also creatures, and they just stop being equipments when they're attached to creatures. So similar to the bestow mechanic from original Theros block, if a creature with reconfigure is attached to a creature and the equipped creature dies, the reconfigure creature will detach and just be a creature. So really interesting design, really cool design space for them to fill up, and I'll just go over these three right here. These are just some uncommon reconfigure creatures you might find in a limited deck. This first one is Acquisition Octopus. It's 2 and a blue for a 2/2 artifact creature equipment octopus. Whenever it or equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, and it reconfigures for 2. So, you know, it can just be your standard 3-mana 2/2, hit your opponent, draw a card, or you can put it on a flyer, and then if they decide to remove that flyer, you know, you get your 2/2 back. It's fine. It's a bit of a steep mana investment, but you get the general vibe. Leech Gauntlet is another one. This is 1 and a black for a 2/2 artifact creature equipment leech. It has lifelink, and equipped creature has lifelink, and you can reconfigure it for 4 mana, which means maybe you want to put this on a big guy, and so you could be gaining a bunch of life in that turn, and then if that guy gets killed, boom, you got your 2/2 back. It's not that big a deal. And just in the early game, you can be swinging with a 2/2. It's just a 2/2 lifelink. You know, 2 mana 2/2 lifelinks are fine and limited. And then this other one is Bronze Plate Boar. This is a 3 mana 3/2 trample. Equipped creature gets +3/+2 and has trample, and reconfigure 5. You know, I think some of this set's limited play patterns are going to be around, like, maybe building the biggest creature on the board to, like, stop a gummed up board state, and Bronze Plate Boar is going to be pretty good about that. You know, taking your biggest creature already, like, you're going to play this as your 3-drop, maybe getting a hit with it, but then, you know, when you've got your biggest creature out, you're going to be making it even bigger, giving it trample, allowing you to sort of take control of the late game. That's going to be the play pattern with this card. So, hopefully we understand how reconfigure works. Next, we're going to talk about modified. Now, this is pretty clever. This is a batching mechanic. It is just a sort of marker that refers to several different things that can happen in a normal game of Magic, but now there can be cards that care about any of those 3 things. So, specifically what modified means is equipped, enchanted, or having counters on it. So, modifications includes equipments, auras, you control, specifically, that's important. So if your opponent puts a pacifism on a creature, it is not modified. And counters, which includes +1/+1 counters, keyword ability counters, like the ones we saw in Ikoria, or -1/-1 counters, if for whatever reason you've decided to put some of those on your creatures. And there are just plenty of cards in this set that care about modified creatures. So let's look at some of those here. We've got Aki Emberkeeper, 2/1 for 1 and a red, enchantment creature Goblin Warrior. Whenever a non-token modified creature you control dies, create a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token. So a little bit of value for your modified guys when they pass away. Then we got Orochi Merge Keeper, 1 and a green for a 1/1, taps to add 1. It's a snake druid, tap to add a green, rather. And as long as it's modified, it has tap to add 2 green. So, you know, this one's a little bit awkward because usually if you're going to be investing in a creature by putting equipment, auras, or counters on it, you want it to be swinging instead of just tapping for mana, but whatever, you know, slap an aura on this, slap an equipment on it, and it can tap for double green if for some reason you really need to get out a big card in the mid-game. And then we got Unforgiving One, which is 2 and a black for 2/3 Spirit with Menace. Whenever Unforgiving One attacks, return target creature card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the number of modified creatures you control. This card feels like win more. It doesn't feel like it'll be able to get anything back unless you've already got a board full of creatures that you've put investment into, in which case you're probably already ahead. But I digress. This is how modified works. It's pretty easy to get off. The cards that scale based on the number of modified cards are a little bit sketchier, but the cards that just care about you controlling a modified creature or themselves being modified are not too difficult, and there's plenty of cards to support that in a set, which we'll of course get into later. Now, one of the returning mechanics is Channel. This one is sort of similar to Cycling. It basically works where you can pay a cost and discard the card with Channel to do a thing listed on the card. So first we've got Reinforced Ronin, which basically literally does have Cycling. This is a red for a 2/2 human samurai artifact creature with haste. At the beginning of your end step, return Reinforced Ronin to its owner's hand, and Channel, 1 in a red, discard Reinforced Ronin, draw a card. So it basically does have Cycling, but it's just, kind of a creature you can hit your opponent with, bounce it back, sort of got that dash thing going on. Touch of the Spirit Realm is another one. It's 2 and a white for an enchantment. When Touch of the Spirit Realm enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target artifact or creature until Touch of the Spirit Realm leaves the battlefield. So you've got a sort of an O-ring going on, although slightly more limited than Oblivion Ring or Banishing Light. And then Channel, 1 and a white, discard Touch the Spirit Realm, exile target artifact or creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So keep in mind all these Channel abilities are instant speed because they don't specifically say that they're sorcery speed. And what this one is going to let you do is blink something for 2 mana. Usually you can do a little better than that, but maybe you've got a creature that just does so much when you blink it that you'd rather do that than have a piece of removal. And then we've got Jukai Preserver, 3 and a gain for a 3/3 enchantment creature, human druid. When Jukai Preserver enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So you can target itself, and then it's a 4 mana 4/4 that is modified because some of that power and toughness come from +1/+1 counter. And you can channel it for 2 and a green, discard it, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures you control. That can be this card I think is good because it's a decent 4-drop, but it can also just be a combat trick if you can get your opponent with that channel ability. This just kind of explains what it does. Basically, just think of it like a card that has an instant on it too that you activate, that you can cast by paying the mana and discarding it. Next, we've got returning mechanic as well, Ninjutsu. Now, these are creatures that when you swing with a creature and it's unblocked, you can pay the ninjutsu cost of the ninja in your hand to switch it with the creature on your field. So this mechanic makes a lot more sense when you see it played than when you hear it explained. But essentially, I swing with my 1/1, you don't block it, I pay the ninjutsu cost for a ninja in my hand, and now you've actually been attacked by this ninja, and the 1/1 is back in my hand. So Prosperous Thief here, 3 mana 3/2, human ninja, ninjutsu for 2. Whenever 1 or more ninja or rogue creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. We've got Nezumi Prowler, 1 and a black for a 3/1, ninjutsu for 2. So the ninjutsu cost is the same as the regular cost. When Nezumi Prowler enters the battlefield, target creature you control gains Death Touch and Lifelink until end of turn, so you can sort of do a little combat trick there. And then Kappa Tech Wrecker, 1 and a green for a 1/3 with ninjutsu, 1 and a green. When it enters the battlefield with a Death Touch counter on it, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you can remove a Death Touch counter from it. When you do, exile target artifact or enchantment that player controls. So basically, if you want to synergize with your ninjas, you're going to be looking for creatures that do something when they enter the battlefield so that you don't feel bad about returning them to your hand, or creatures with some sort of evasion so that it's easy to guarantee you'll be able to get that ninjutsu going. So those are the mechanics of the set by and large. There's also sagas, but those have been in so many sets I don't feel like I really need to call them returning mechanics. I think within a year or two they'll probably be evergreen. Although this set does have sagas that flip into creatures on their last mode, but we will get into talking about those. Several of them appear here in the limited guide. So let's begin talking about the limited archetypes. And we're going to start with green-white, which is Enchantments Matter. So the sort of signpost uncommon for this archetype, the multicolored uncommon that tells you what those colors are trying to do in limited, is Jukai Naturalist. It's a green and a white for an enchantment creature, human monk. 2/2, lifelink. Enchantment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So this guy's got a lot going on. He is an enchantment himself, for what that's worth. He makes all your enchantments cost 1 less, and a 2 mana 2/2 lifelink without any other abilities passes the vanilla test. You play that in your deck. Skyblessed Samurai is going to kind of be the top end of this deck in terms of what's available at common and uncommon. It's 6 and a white for a 4/4 enchantment creature, human samurai. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each enchantment you control, and it's got flying. So if you're spending the early turns playing these sagas, playing maybe Jukai Naturalist, maybe these common and uncommon cheap enchantment creatures, you could reasonably get this guy down to being a 4-mana 4/4 flyer, which you love in Limited. That's phenomenal. And then we've got Generous Visitor. This is a spirit for a green. It's a 1/1. And whenever you cast an enchantment spell, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. This is a 1-drop, but I think it's probably worth playing in Limited. It can target itself. So if you play this and then you play a 2-drop enchantment on turn 2, you can go ahead and put the counter on him. And then if that was an enchantment creature, turn 3, you play another enchantment, put a counter on that creature, and this just kind of spirals out of control. And your opponent is always going to feel terrible using removal on a 1-drop. So having a 1-drop that just grants you so much reach throughout the game that your opponent is going to kind of have to answer it feels pretty good. So that's green-white enchantments. If you're playing this deck, you're gonna want to grab every decent enchantment creature you can find and just maybe get yourself some cheaper 4/4 flyers and some of those valuable sagas. Next, we've got the white-blue archetype, Vehicles. So vehicles appear in every few sets, but here they're a major theme for one of the color pairs. And there's these sort of mech suits. Think Gundam or Neon Genesis Evangelion. You've got Prodigy's Prototype, 1 a white and a blue for a 3/4 vehicle, which crews for 2, and whenever 1 or more vehicles you control attack, create a 1/1 colorless pilot creature token with this creature crews vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. So one of the big themes going on with these vehicles is that you can make these 1/1 pilots that crew as though they're 3/1s. And then you've got a lot of these mechs that have a crew cost of 3 or less that makes it so that these tokens can crew them just by themselves, which is really cool because if you're playing a vehicle-based deck, it feels really awful to have a field full of vehicles and no creatures to crew them. So some of these vehicles being able to make their own pilots is really helpful. Then we've got Mobilizer Mech, 1 and a blue for a 3/4 flyer with crew 3. And whenever Mobilizer Mech becomes crewed, up to 1 other target vehicle you control becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. So by a triggered ability, when you crew this, you get to crew one of your other vehicles for free, which is pretty crazy. There have been plenty of vehicles that have been able to crew themselves, and this isn't quite as good as that, like having some alternate cost for crewing, because you do still, at the end of the day, have to have a creature to crew this in order to let this automatically crew another vehicle. But it does certainly give you a little reach. It makes you feel less bad about playing a lot of vehicles. And then we've got Hotshot Mechanic, which is a white for a 2/1 artifact creature Fox Pilot. Hotshot Mechanic crews vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. So it crews as a 4/1, which means it can crew pretty much any of the vehicles in a set, or at least make it a lot easier to. Not to mention, it's a 1-mana 2/1, and in Limited, that's not only do you feel fine playing it on turn 2 because it's a 2/1, it doesn't feel great, but it kind of acts as a 2-drop. But if you are in a situation where you draw this and you can play it on turn 1 and then play a 2-drop on turn 2, you're going to be able to be very aggressive. So 1-mana 2/1s are pretty nice. So that's the white-blue vehicles archetype. Next, we've got blue-black ninjutsu. Now, we talked about these ninjas before. You've even seen 2 of these ninjas when I explained the mechanic to you. So I'll just explain what the Signpost Uncommon is, and then kind of talk about the kind of gameplay you're going to want with ninjas. So the Signpost Uncommon is Silver Fur Master. It's a blue and a black for a 2/2 rat ninja with ninjutsu for a blue and a black. Ninjutsu abilities you activate cost 1 less to activate, and other ninja and rogue creatures you control get +1/+1. So this is kind of a ninja and rogue lord that can come in at instant speed. You can have your opponent not expect you to have a lord, but then you do. And then if you have this ninjutsu abilities you activate cost 1 less to activate, you can do a lot with that, including actually looping. If you have 2 ninjas that do something when they enter the battlefield rather than when they hit your opponent, you can ninjutsu them and switch them with each other with all of your mana until you're ready to actually hit your opponent with one of them. So that can be pretty nasty. But yeah, Silver Fur Master is a lord that can come in at instant speed potentially, and just buffs all your ninjas and rogues. So, great to look out for if you're trying to play this deck. But a lot of the ninjas can be okay on their own. You don't really need that much synergy for them. Maybe you're playing like a black-white deck, but Nezumi Prowler, it makes the cut. It sort of depends on where you need them in your curve. So we've got black-red sack artifacts. And what this archetype is trying to do is sack artifacts. We can look at the Signpost Uncommon. Oni Cult Anvil is a black and a red for an artifact. Whenever one or more artifacts you control leave the battlefield during your turn, create a 1/1 colorless construct artifact creature token. This ability triggers only once each turn. So basically, the first time that one of your artifacts leaves, you get a 1/1, and that includes the construct itself. And then you can tap and sack an artifact. Oni Cult Anvil deals 1 damage to each opponent. You gain 1 life. Now, I want to point out, at first read, sometimes this looks like a 1-card version of the Cat Oven combo from Eldraine Limited and Standard. That is not the case. You only get a 1/1 the first time something leaves on your turn, so you can't block with the construct, sack it to the anvil to drain your opponent for 1 like you could with the cat, and then make the construct, then make a new construct. It does not work like that. But with that said, you do have a lot of options with this. You will eventually get enough 1/1 constructs to definitely have gotten your mana's worth off of Oni Cult Anvil, especially if you get enough of the artifact that makes that exiles the top card when it comes in or leaves, and you can play it that turn. Stuff like that really makes this card worth playing. We've got Silkenzan Smelter, which is 1 and a red for a 2/2 Goblin Artificer. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may pay 1 and sacrifice an artifact. If you do, create a 3/1 red construct artifact creature token with haste. So if you pair this with something that has some way to make treasure, then you can be turning your treasures into 3/1s with haste, and those don't go away at the end of the turn either. If you pair this with Oni Cult Anvil, you can be turning all of those colorless constructs into 3/1 constructs with haste. So just a very cool way to use any artifacts you might have access to. And then we've got Dockside Chef. Dockside Chef is a black for a 1/2 enchantment creature human citizen. You can pay 1 and a black and sacrifice an artifact or creature, draw a card. So just a great sort of sack outlet. You got a lot of little dudes and you need to draw your bomb. He'll help you do it late game. Nothing to really complain about there. But he can also sacrifice artifacts, which makes him fit in with the theme here. And last but not least, for the ally color pairs, we've got red-green, which is modified. So here we've got Invigorating Hot Spring, which is 1, a red, and a green for an enchantment. Invigorating Hot Spring enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. Modified creatures you control have haste. Remove a +1/+1 counter from Invigorating Hot Spring. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Activate only as a sorcery and only once each turn. So this card reads kind of awkwardly, but basically it comes in with 4 +1/+1 counters. Your modified creatures have haste, so when you move a counter from this onto one of your creatures, it becomes modified and thus gains haste. If you play this on turn 3, turn 4 you play down a creature, move a counter from this onto the creature, not only does that creature have the counter, it gets haste from the Invigorating Hot Spring. So this will create some interesting lines of play where you have to decide, do I move multiple counters onto one creature just because it's what I can do right now, or do I wait until I play a creature that doesn't have a way to modify itself natively so I can make sure as many of my creatures as possible are modified? I think it's going to be kind of a skill testing card, but it is a great aggressive card, and you're not going to feel too bad about taking it. I guess on the flip side, if your turn 3 is taken up by this and your opponent's being aggressive, they might win the race. So you're going to want to consider playing other 3-drops to sort of have options to gauge what you should do at that point. But against like sort of slower decks, this is going to be really nice. And then we've got Coiling Stalker. Now this is 1 and a green for a 2/1 Snake Ninja, and it does have ninjutsu for 1 and a green, so that's a little added text. But whenever Coiling Stalker deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control that doesn't have a +1/+1 counter on it. Now this card is very powerful for a common. Note that it can target itself, meaning it can immediately modify itself as soon as it hits your opponent once. Then it counts as a modified creature. But also, now that it is that 3/2, if you can get it to hit your opponent again, and you have another creature that doesn't have a +1/+1 counter on it, it can put a counter on that creature. This card can really power out a deck by itself. So great card to look out for. One of the best commons in green in this set, easily. And then we've got Upriser Renegade, 1 and a red for a 1/3 human samurai. It gets +2/+0 for each other modified creature you control. So important to remember, if you modify him, he does not get the +2/+0 for that. But if you have like 2 other modified creatures, which isn't really that hard, then this is a 2-mana 5/3. Of course, we try not to live in magical Christmas land. So one other modified creature, it's a 2-mana 3/3, which is very good. And no other modified creatures, it can still block. So this is one of the bread and butter uncommons for this deck, it seems like. Moving on to the enemy color pairs, we've got white-black artifacts and enchantments. So these are cards that will give you a sort of buff for having an artifact, a buff for having an enchantment, or sometimes a buff for having both. They don't care so much about how many. Well, some of them care about how many artifacts and enchantments you have, but a lot of them will care about, do you have an artifact and an enchantment? If so, get a bonus. So, for example, Naomi, Pillar of Order, 3 white and a black for a uncommon legendary human advisor, 4/4. Whenever Naomi, Pillar of Order enters the battlefield or attacks, if you control an artifact and an enchantment, create a 2/2 white samurai creature token with vigilance. I'm not exaggerating when I say this can reach Grave Titan levels of good. Obviously, Grave Titan's a 6-drop, makes 2 2/2s every turn unconditionally, but I think this does a pretty decent impression. It makes a 2/2 with vigilance. It's a 5-mana 4/4, and all you have to do is control an artifact and an enchantment, and that's not really that hard. You see, looking over the set, that a lot of the common and uncommon cheap creatures are artifacts or enchantments as well. So I don't think Naomi will be that hard to activate. Speaking of cards that aren't that hard to activate, Kami of Terrible Secrets is 3 and a black for a 3/4 spirit. With the same sort of condition, when it enters the battlefield, if you control an artifact and enchantment, you draw a card and you gain 1 life. You know we love Pizza Rhinos. Usually you see them in green. They're the bread and butter, common and uncommon, middle of the game creatures that draw you a card when they come in, that replace themselves and also make a presence on the board. And that's what Kami of Terrible Secrets is. If you don't have an enchantment and an artifact, it's a little rough to just have a 4-mana 3/4 that doesn't do anything else. But like I said, there's so many sagas, so many artifact creatures, so many enchantment creatures, cheap and at the common and uncommon slot, that it's not going to be that difficult to draw a card and gain a life off of this coming in. And then lastly, for this archetype, we've got Michiko's Reign of Truth. So this is the first saga we're looking at here, and it is 1 and a white. Step 1 and 2, target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each artifact and or enchantment you control. And then step 3, exile the saga, then return it to the battlefield transformed under your control. And the transformed version of it is Portrait of Michiko, an enchantment creature, human noble, with Portrait of Michiko gets +1/+1 for each artifact and or enchantment you control. So kind of a janky all that glitters, but it doesn't have to enchant the creature, and you can pick a different creature each turn. This card's very strong, I think. You know, as a baseline, it counts itself, as does the flipped side, which is an enchantment creature. So it's at least going to give +1/+1, and then be a 1/1. But realistically, you're going to be playing this in a deck that's got a few artifacts and enchantments. And don't be surprised if this is able to give like a giant growth with the first 2 modes and then flip into a 3/3, 4/4, you know? That's really possible. It's not sort of out of reach. So good card to pick up, good 2-drop, bit of a slow. You don't actually want to play this on turn 2, so 2-drop is probably not the right term to use. You know, you want to use this when you can buff up like a flyer or a thing with lifelink maybe. But you know, good to pick up for the mid game. So this is sort of how the white-black artifacts and enchantments deck is going to run. Next, we've got black-green Graveyard. Now, black-green Graveyard is sort of just built around, like, you know, getting things back from your graveyard, getting the best things you can into your graveyard so that you can play them, getting value by returning multiple things from your graveyard for pretty cheap. So we've got the Signpost Uncommon Gloom Shrieker, 1 a black and a green for an enchantment creature Cat Beast, a 2/1 with Menace. When Gloom Shrieker enters the battlefield, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. If Gloom Shrieker would die, exile it instead. So they've sort of taken the classic, sort of powerful modern card, Eternal Witness, and turned a lot of dials on it. It can only return permanents, and you can't loop it, because when it dies, it gets exiled. And in exchange, they've made it an enchantment and given it Menace, which, I mean, honestly isn't worth it, but you don't get to play Eternal Witness in most limited formats, and this does a good enough impression that it's still going to be one of the better Signpost Uncommons in the set. Any permanent card, you know, that's a creature, that's an enchantment, that's an artifact, that's a lot of different things you can grab with it, and it's a 2/1 Menace for 3, which is not awful, so pretty good to get. We've also got Season of Renewal, 2 and a green for an instant, choose 1 or both. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Return target enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. So this sort of links up with the green-white enchantments archetype, and you'll see that a lot in this set. The themes are very cohesive, and the archetypes are not really limited to being played just in the decks they're meant to be in. It's a very splashable format, and it's a format where a lot of the cards you're going to be competing with players in other archetypes to see who can get it and who can make the best use of it in draft. So then the other thing we've got that I put here as an example of the black-green graveyard archetype is Okiba Salvage, which is another one that references another archetype. It's 4 and a black for a sorcery. Return target creature or vehicle card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Then put 2+1/+1 counters on that permanent if you control an artifact and an enchantment, which even if you're in black-green is not super hard to do. It's easier in black-white, obviously, because that's sort of built around it. But returning a creature or vehicle from your graveyard to the battlefield for 5 mana is not bad. There's plenty of pretty big reanimator targets, especially those big creatures that you can channel in the early game and then maybe salvage once you hit 5 mana and get something a little bit cheaper than you should have been able to get it. So yeah, this archetype is just all about working around with the graveyard. Black-green does that in a lot of limited formats. Next, we're going to talk about green-blue ramp. So this card, Colossal Sky Turtle, is the signpost uncommon. It is 4 double green and a blue for an enchantment creature turtle. It's a 6/5 with flying and ward 2. Now it has 2 different channel abilities. I believe this is the first card to do that. One of them is 2 and a green, discard Colossal Sky Turtle, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So a lot of versatility with that one, and keep in mind these are all instant speed. And then the other channel is 1 and a blue, discard Colossal Sky Turtle, return target creature to its owner's hand. So kind of a crappy bounce effect. But you can ramp into this, get up to 7 mana, you got a 6/5 flying ward 2. At that point they can probably pay the ward, but then they're using their whole turn to kill your Colossal Sky Turtle. And if they don't, a 6-power flyer ends games like little else does. So Colossal Sky Turtle is definitely something that has to be respected. And you'll see that this ramp deck also has sort of a channel thing going on. A lot of these big ramp options have their sort of inherent downside of not being able to necessarily be played, mitigated by having an alternate thing you can do with channel. So like if we look at Mirror Shell Crab, which is another part of this archetype, 5 and double blue for a 5/7 artifact creature crab with ward 3 and channel, 2 and a blue, discard Mirror Shell Crab, counter target spell or ability unless its controller pays 3. So this can be a counter spell in the early game, but also, you know, if you hold on to it long enough, 7 mana, 5/7, ward 3, it's just a big creature with some protection on it. Who doesn't love that? And then also we've got Greater Tanuki, which is 4 and double green for an enchantment creature dog. It's a 6/5 with trample. And channel, 2 and a green, discard Greater Tanuki, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So a sort of instant speed, 3 mana rampant growth, or a Colossal Dreadmaw with 1 less toughness. That's also an enchantment. Very versatile, could see play in several decks, but this sort of channel ramp deck is really coming together with these early game using these channel effects to sort of keep yourself safe, and then playing big creatures. And then next we've got blue-red, which the theme is just sort of artifacts. It's less so like the black-red archetype that specifically wants you to sack artifacts or have them leave play, and more just cards that kind of synergize with artifacts. And there are a lot of directions you can take this deck. Just looking at the signpost uncommon Enthusiastic Mechanaut, which is a blue and a red for a 2/2 artifact creature, Goblin Artificer, with flying, and artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So this is sort of a Goblin Electromancer for artifacts instead, and it's a flyer, and it's an artifact. So it really will allow you to go the aggressive route or the sort of control route. So we've got Tawashi Song Shaper, which is controversial art. A lot of people did not like a DJ spinning vinyl in a Magic the Gathering card. That might be a little bit too futuristic for some people. But Tawashi Song Shaper is 1 and a red for a 2/2 human artificer, artifact creature as well. Whenever another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Tawashi Song Shaper gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So if you've built this deck right, it's going to pretty often be a 3/2, sometimes be a 4/2, and that's a pretty good 2-drop to have. This is just going to be a good 2-drop to fill your deck with. And then looking more at the long game direction you can take this deck in, we've got Replication Specialist, which is 4 and a blue for a 3/4 Moonfolk Artificer with flying. Whenever a non-token artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1 and a blue. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that artifact. So 5 mana 3/4 flyers are pretty fine. That's a pretty decent stat line. But the big thing about Replication Specialist is you stick this, and next turn you've got an artifact you can play. That artifact can be replicated for 1 and a blue. So think, you know, a lot of these common, uncommon artifact creatures are good to do with that. You got these replicate tokens. There's just a lot of directions you can, these reconfigure creatures. There's just a lot of directions you can take Replication Specialist in, and it's a very, very powerful card to untap with in a deck that's got the right amount of artifacts. So I wanted to give a shout out to Replication Specialist. And then lastly, but not leastly, we've got red-white, which is Samurai attacking alone. Now this includes Samurai and Warriors, and there are some Warriors in this set, but they wanted to sort of batch them so that they'd be compatible with cards from other sets, which makes sense. I think that was a smart thing to do. The uncommon signpost card is Asari Captain. 3, a red and a white for a 4/3 human samurai with haste, and whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each samurai or warrior you control. So for those of you who've been playing for a while, this came out in Shards of Alara block, and then it was sort of experimented with again in a core set. But there used to be that mechanic Exalted, where it was on permanence, and whenever a creature attacks alone, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So the more Exalted creatures you had out, the bigger the one creature you swung in with could be. And it was a really interesting mechanic, because it kind of incentivized you to leave up blockers, and it like encouraged you to attack, but also like go a little slower than most decks would, because you can only attack with one creature. Created interesting board states. So they're kind of bringing that back here, but with more than just +1/+1 on every card. They all do interesting different things. So we'll look at Ancestral Katana. This is a common 1 and a white artifact equipment. Whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, you may pay 1. When you do, attach Ancestral Katana to it. Equipped creature gets +2/+1, and it equips for 3. So this card's pretty good. +2/+1 and equipping for 1 when you swing by yourself as a samurai or warrior is pretty great. Honestly, you know, you're going to be swinging with one creature anyway, because that's what this deck wants you to do, so you might as well pile all of your equipments onto it, and Ancestral Katana lets you do that for 1, which is a pretty good rate. And then we've got Aki Ronin, which is 1 and a red for a 1/3 Goblin Samurai. Whenever a samurai or warrior you control attacks alone, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. So plenty of 2-mana cards in this archetype. There's another 2-mana 2/1 that whenever you attack with a samurai or warrior alone, it gets +1/+1. Pretty powerful card. Lot of stuff with that. But I think the biggest strength of this archetype is sort of the fact that like you don't really need to build around it that much. All the cards are pretty much good on their own. Like you look at Asari Captain. If he's the only creature you control, he's a 5-mana 5/3 haste. Like you could do a lot worse. Aki Ronin, same thing. 2-mana 1/3. When it swings, discard a card, draw a card. Yeah, that's fine, you know? A lot of these cards are just okay to splash into other decks, or to work even if you're kind of on the back foot and you haven't built up a board that lets you attack alone and trigger like 3 different effects. So Samurai attacking alone is going to be a really interesting archetype that I'm excited to play with. So real quick, I want to just go over what I think are the general best cards to look for in the set. And just the most useful sort of things to keep your eye out for. They're mostly uncommons, with a couple commons. Of course, I don't like to talk about rares in the pre-release primer in case you didn't notice. Usually they're pretty easy to evaluate, and yeah, you know, they're rares. So we've got Twin Shot Sniper, 3 and a red for an artifact creature, Goblin Archer. It's a 2/3 with reach. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to any target, and you can channel it for 1 and a red, discard it, it deals 2 damage to any target. This card is incredibly versatile. So when you think of cards like Flametongue Kavu, which is sort of an all-star, a mid-range sort of red creature that's a little bit below the curve but gets to kill something when it comes in. This is a 4-mana 2/3 reach, and it gets to pop, you know, your opponent's 2-drop when it comes in, which is going to be really nice. Not to mention, if you don't have anything to do on turn 2, you can leave this up to channel to kill something that your opponent plays at instant speed. So this card's just really, really nice. Just really good to have. Your opponent, maybe they play a 3-mana 3/2, and then you're feeling really good because on your turn you play down a Twin Shot Sniper, kill it, and you leave a 2/3 behind. Just very, very good. Next we've got Blossom Prancer, and this is a Pizza Rhino for sure. This is 3 and double green for a 4/4 spirit with reach. When Blossom Prancer enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature or enchantment card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And that's not all. If you didn't put a card into your hand in this way, you gain 4 life. So this card has so many options. 5 mana, 4/4 reach, fine body. Look at the top 5. There's going to be a creature or enchantment in there. It's up to you whether you want it or not. That's the important thing. And if you're up against an aggressive deck that you've been taking hits in the first games, and this Blossom Prancer is the first big body you've been able to drop to stabilize, maybe you don't take any of them. You just gain 4 life to sort of put yourself back into a safer position. But a lot of the time, maybe you're against a control deck and you need to get through their critical mass of removal, so you just need this to go into a different threat in the next turn. So you grab another creature off the top 4 off the top 5 with this. Very, very good card. Green decks are going to want to play as many copies of this as they get in Limited for sure. And then we've got a white uncommon, The Fall of Lord Konda. 2 and a white for a saga. Step 1, exile target creature an opponent controls with mana value 4 or greater. Step 2, each player gains control of all permanents they own. Step 3, exile this saga, then return it to the battlefield transformed under your control. And the transformed side is a 1/3 with Defender, and when Fragment of Konda dies, draw a card. Now, the flip side's not super good. The second step is hardly ever going to be relevant, but you gotta look at this from the frame of the first step of the saga is enough. You are happy to pay 3 mana for that effect. The last 2 are just icing on the cake, and it is some good icing. You're looking at the second step, really doesn't do anything. You can probably count on one hand the amount of cards that might make this relevant and limited. But step 3, 1/3 Defender, when it dies, draw a card. That's just awesome. That just chumps something. You're going to kill something with the first step, and then when this flips, you're going to chump something. You're going to draw a card. You're going to protect yourself from whatever this blocked. That's just really good value. So the Fall of Lord Konda is going to be, I think, slept on, but I think it's going to be one of the best uncommons in the Limited format around white. And then we've got 2 more of the sort of general best cards I want to talk about. I honestly believe Armguard Familiar is one of the best commons we have gotten in blue in several years in terms of Limited. Let me tell you what this does. It is 1 and a blue for a 2/1 artifact creature, Equipment Beast. It has Ward 2, and it can reconfigure for 4. And when you reconfigure it onto a creature, the equipped creature gets +2/+1 and has Ward 2. When you put a beat stick down late in the game in Limited, you want to be able to protect it. You want to be able to make sure that it can hit your opponent a few times, hopefully to win, or at the very least be up to block. And giving it Ward 2 means that your opponent is not only going to have to spend their whole turn removing it, but then you're going to get this Armguard Familiar back. And I think that wouldn't be good enough by itself. But the fact that you can play this as a 2-drop, and you're going to be happy to play this as a 2-drop, because a 2-mana 2/1 with Ward 2 is, it's just your regular 2-drop, except your opponent's not going to be able to really answer it. So Armguard Familiar, very, very, very powerful card. You're going to love any number of copies as you can get. Just putting 2/2/1 and Ward 2 on a flyer will just help close out the game so well. I think, you guys let me know in the comments. I don't know if I'm misevaluating this, but I think Armguard Familiar is very, very good. And then we've got, in black, The Long Reach of Night. Now, this is probably the most sus pick I've put on the list. I don't actually know if this is that good. I just like it. 3 and a black for an enchantment saga. Steps 1 and 2, each opponent sacrifices a creature unless they discard a card. So that is worded very weirdly, but it basically, if they have creatures and cards, it lets them pick. If they don't have one, they have to do the other. And essentially, this is more often than not going to be a slow mind rot. But then step 3, you flip it over. It's a 0/4 Menace, enchantment creature spirit, Animus of Night's Reach. And whenever it attacks, it gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the number of creature cards in defending player's graveyard. This is going to get a lot better later in the game, but that first ability is going to put some creatures in their yard. You're considering, what makes Mind Rot risky in a lot of Limited formats to the point where it usually doesn't see play is that, you could draw it when your opponent doesn't have any more cards in their hand, and then it doesn't do anything. But this makes them sack a creature if they're out of cards in their hand, and it can do it twice. I know that's the ceiling for the card, but it's something to be considered. And even if you are just making them discard 2 cards from their hand with this, they still probably had to play around that. Not dumping their whole hand to make sure that they have something to discard so they don't have to sack a creature. And then with the final step of the saga, you're going to get a 0-4. Like, at the very worst, at this point in the game, it should at least be a 2-4 menace, which is definitely something worth considering. So I think the Long Reach of Night, definitely consider it for your limited deck. Consider picking it in draft. Not over removal or anything, but it's decent. And then we've got Circuit Mender. Never in my life did I think I would see a strictly better Filigree Familiar, also an uncommon. But here we go. Circuit Mender is a 3-mana 2/3 artifact creature insect. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life. When it leaves the battlefield, draw a card. So the 2 big differences between this and Filigree Familiar that really just pushes it over the edge is the 1 extra toughness and the leaves the battlefield instead of die on that draw card. There's so many things. This card is excellent to blink, which there are a few ways to do in limited in this format. And the biggest thing is removal that doesn't destroy, that like exiles or deals damage and then if it died, exiles instead, stuff like that. You're still going to get to draw a card off of this. One of the things that sucked about playing Filigree Familiar back in the day, in Standard especially, was, removal that would, there was a Lava Spray, that's the card. It was a red for an instant, 2 damage to target creature, and if it would kill that creature's exiled instead. You put out your Filigree Familiar, you gain your 2 life, they kill it with Lava Spray, you don't even get to draw the card when it dies. But with this, not only that, but I haven't even gotten to the biggest thing about it. If you attack with Circuit Mender, they don't block it, and you ninjutsu in a new creature, you get to draw a card from Circuit Mender bouncing to your hand, and then you can play it back down, gain 2 life, and then the next time it leaves, you'll draw another card, and you're just living in Value Town. I think Circuit Mender, you'd be hard-pressed to find a limited deck that Circuit Mender does not belong in. This card is certainly first pickable in a lot of packs, where it's just not, obviously where it's not better than the rare, but as many Circuit Menders as you can get, you should try to get, and as many as you get, you should play. One of the best uncommons in the limited format, easily, and it's colorless. With that said, I want to thank you all for watching my first Magic the Gathering video. I'm really excited for this pre-release. I hope I helped you. If this helped you, feel free to drop a like, feel free to subscribe. I would love for this channel to sort of get off the ground. I would love to start producing some more Magic the Gathering content. I play a lot of Modern, a lot of Limited, and I'd love to just talk about that. So if this video was of help to you, let me know by subscribing and liking, and shoot me a comment. Tell me what you think are the best cards in this limited format, how you think these archetypes are going to sort of work. And as always, well, I guess not as always, because this is my first video on this channel. But as always, if you've seen videos of mine on other channels, have a good day.